What if everything you've been told about success is backwards? What if the key to winning isn't hustling harder, competing, or even setting goals, but something much simpler and way more powerful? Most people spend their lives chasing validation, comparing themselves, and getting distracted by noise. But there's an ancient principle, one that warriors and monks have used for centuries, that flips this entire mindset upside down. It's not about what happens around you, it's about what happens inside you. And if you master this, everything changes. The illusion of competition. You ever notice how the more you compare yourself to others, the weaker you feel? That's not an accident. The moment you start measuring your progress against someone else's, you give away your power. This is one of the most subtle yet destructive patterns that operates in the human mind, and most people never recognize it until it has already consumed years of their potential. Think about it. When a lion hunts, it doesn't stop to check if the cheetah caught more prey. It doesn't waste energy on what the other animals are doing. It focuses, it moves with precision, it trusts its own instinct. The lion understands something fundamental that we have forgotten in our modern world, that true strength comes from within, not from comparison with what exists outside. But we live in a different reality now. We are constantly bombarded with images of other people's success, their achievements, their perfect moments, carefully curated and displayed for the world to see. Social media has turned comparison into a full-time occupation for millions of people. They wake up and immediately begin measuring their morning against someone else's highlight reel. They go to sleep feeling inadequate because they didn't accomplish what someone else appeared to accomplish that day. This comparison trap operates on multiple levels. On the surface, it seems like motivation. You see someone doing better and you think it will inspire you to work harder. Sometimes this happens, but more often what occurs is a subtle erosion of your own confidence and clarity. You begin to question your path, your methods, your timeline. You start to think that because someone else is moving faster, you must be moving too slowly. Because someone else chose a different approach, yours must be wrong. The deeper problem with comparison is that it's always based on incomplete information. You see the results, but not the process. You see the victory, but not the defeats that led to it. You see the moment of triumph, but not the years of preparation, the setbacks, the doubt, the grinding daily work that nobody photographs or celebrates. When you compare your behind the scenes with someone else's highlight reel, you are comparing two completely different things, and the comparison becomes meaningless. Even more problematic is that comparison shifts your focus from internal to external. Instead of asking, "Am I better than I was yesterday?" you start asking, "Am I better than them?" Instead of measuring your progress against your own potential, you measure it against someone else's current position. This external focus takes you away from the most important relationship you will ever have, the relationship with your own growth, your own journey, your own becoming. The same applies to you. Every second you spend worrying about someone else's success is a second you're not building yours. This isn't just about time management or productivity, it's about energy, attention, and consciousness itself. Your mind has a limited capacity for focus in any given moment. When that focus is scattered across multiple targets, your goals, their achievements, your progress, their advantages, nothing receives the full power of your attention. The world will always have people who seem ahead, who seem faster, luckier, or more talented. This is a fundamental truth that you must accept completely. There will always be someone who started earlier, who had better opportunities, who has natural advantages you don't possess. There will always be someone who appears to be moving more quickly toward similar goals. If you base your sense of progress on comparison with others, you will live in a constant state of inadequacy because the supply of people to compare yourself to is infinite. But that doesn't matter, because real strength isn't about beating them, it's about mastering yourself. This is where the lion's wisdom becomes most relevant. The lion doesn't hunt to prove it's better than other predators. It hunts because it's hungry, because hunting is its nature, because it has developed its skills and wants to use them effectively. The lion's relationship is with its own capabilities, its own instincts, its own development as a hunter. When you shift from external competition to internal mastery, everything changes. Your energy becomes focused and concentrated instead of scattered and reactive. Your motivation becomes sustainable because it comes from within rather than depending on external circumstances. Your progress becomes measurable because you're using consistent standards rather than constantly changing comparison. Internal mastery means developing your own standards of excellence. It means knowing what you're capable of and working to expand those capabilities. It means being more interested in your own growth than in anyone else's. It means treating your development as a craft that you're refining rather than a race that you're trying to win. This doesn't mean you become isolated or stop learning from others, but the learning becomes strategic rather than comparative. You study others to understand techniques, principles, and possibilities, not to measure your worth against theirs. You remain open to inspiration and knowledge while staying centered in your own path and your own progress. The illusion of competition dissolves when you realize that everyone is on their own unique journey, with their own starting point, their own challenges, their own definition of success. Your job is not to beat anyone else. Your job is to become the fullest expression of your own potential, to master your own mind and abilities, to create value in your own unique way. When you truly understand this, comparison stops being a source of weakness and becomes irrelevant. You move with the focused power of the lion, trusting your instincts, following your path, measuring your progress against your own potential rather than someone else's position. The art of selective ignorance. Most distractions aren't just noise, they're social media, opinions, gossip, even well-meaning advice from people who don't truly understand your path. This represents one of the most critical skills you can develop in the modern world, the ability to consciously choose what deserves your attention and what does not. In a time when information flows toward you from countless sources, every moment of every day, selective attention becomes not just useful, but essential for any form of meaningful progress. Think about the nature of attention itself. Your consciousness is like a spotlight that can only illuminate one area at a time. When that spotlight jumps rapidly from one thing to another, from a notification to a conversation, to a worry, to a task, to another notification, nothing receives the full power of your focus. The quality of your attention determines the quality of your results, your relationships, your understanding, and ultimately your life itself. There's a reason monks train in silence, not because the world is silent, but because they know the value of blocking out what doesn't serve them. This practice of selective attention has been understood by serious practitioners of inner development for thousands of years. The monk creates silence not to escape from life, but to engage with life more fully, more consciously, more effective. By eliminating the constant stream of mental noise, Space is created for deeper thinking, clearer perception, and more powerful action. But you don't need to become a monk to apply this principle. You can begin to practice selective ignorance immediately, starting with the smallest choices about where you direct your attention throughout the day. Every time you choose to focus on something that moves you toward your goals, instead of something that distracts you from them, you are practicing this art. Every time you choose depth over breadth, quality over quantity, signal over noise, you are strengthening your capacity for selective attention. Consider social media as an example. The platforms are specifically designed to capture and hold your attention for as long as possible. They use sophisticated algorithms that study your behavior and feed you content calculated to trigger emotional responses that keep you scrolling. The business model depends on your attention, and every minute you spend scrolling is a minute of your life that you're exchanging for the profit of these companies. But the cost isn't just time. The cost is mental clarity, emotional stability, and focus itself. When you consume a constant stream of random information, opinions, updates, and reactions, your mind becomes accustomed to fragmentation. You lose the ability to sustain attention on any one thing for extended period. You become reactive instead of responsive, scattered instead of focused, influenced by every passing stimulus, instead of guided by your own clear intentions. You don't owe anyone your attention. This is a fundamental truth that most people never fully grasp. Your attention is your most valuable resource, more precious than money, more important than time itself. Time passes, whether you use it well or poorly, but attention is the quality that determines what you do with the time you have. When you give your attention away carelessly, you are giving away your power to shape your own experience and your own future. You don't have to react to every comment, every trend, or every opinion thrown your way. In fact, the more you react to external stimuli, the less control you have over your own mental state and your own direction. Reaction is unconscious and automatic. Response is conscious and chosen. When you develop the ability to pause between stimulus and response, you reclaim your power to choose what deserves your energy and what does not. The more you filter out, the sharper your focus becomes. This is not about becoming narrow-minded or closed to new ideas. This is about becoming discriminating, about developing the wisdom to distinguish between what serves your growth and what hinders it. A master craftsman doesn't use every tool available. They choose the right tool for the specific task at hand. Similarly, a master of attention doesn't consume every piece of information available. They select what contributes to their understanding and their progress. Ask yourself, what am I letting into my mind that's slowing me down? This question requires honest self-examination. Look at how you spend your mental energy throughout a typical day. Notice what captures your attention without providing real value. Notice what triggers emotional reactions that don't lead to productive. Notice what fills your mind with worry, comparison, judgment, or other states that drain your energy without creating any positive result. The inputs to your mind are like the ingredients you put into your body. If you consume mental junk food, gossip, outrage, superficial entertainment, other people's drama, your thinking becomes cloudy, your emotions become unstable, and your capacity for sustained effort becomes weakened. If you choose high-quality mental nutrition, wisdom, knowledge that you can apply, inspiration that motivates meaningful action, your thinking becomes clearer, your emotions become more stable, and your capacity for achievement increases. Cut it off, not with anger but with discipline. This distinction is crucial. When you eliminate distractions with anger or frustration, you create internal conflict and resistance. When you eliminate them with discipline, You create space and clarity. Discipline is not about forcing yourself to avoid things you want. Discipline is about choosing what you want most over what you want right now. The practice of selective ignorance becomes easier as you become clearer about your priorities and your goal. When you know exactly where you want to go and what you want to create, it becomes much simpler to identify what supports that direction and what interferes with it. The clearer your vision, the easier it becomes to say no to everything that doesn't align with that vision. This doesn't mean becoming isolated or completely cutting yourself off from the world. It means becoming intentional about your inputs, conscious about your choices, and protective of your mental space. It means creating boundaries around your attention so that you can use it with maximum effectiveness rather than having it scattered by every demand, every notification, every piece of information that wants to claim a piece of your consciousness. The power of repetition. People quit too soon. They try something a few times, don't see results, and assume it's not working. This represents one of the most fundamental misunderstandings about how real progress actually happens. We live in a culture that promises instant results, immediate gratification, and quick fixes for every challenge. But the deepest, most meaningful changes in life operate on a completely different time scale than our impatient minds expect. Think of a river carving through rock. It's not one massive wave that does the work. It's the steady, relentless flow, drop by drop over time. This image contains profound wisdom about the nature of transformation. The river doesn't force itself through the rock with violent effort. It doesn't try once and give up when it encounters resistance. It simply continues, consistently, persistently, allowing the accumulated effect of countless small actions to create dramatic change over time. But mastery doesn't happen in the first 10 tries or the 100th. This truth challenges everything our instant gratification culture teaches us to expect. We see the end result of someone's expertise and imagine that they achieved it quickly or easily. We don't see the thousands of hours of practice, the countless repetitions, the gradual refinement of skill that created what appears to be effortless mastery. Consider learning a musical instrument. A beginner might practice for a few weeks and become frustrated that they don't sound like a professional musician. They might conclude that they don't have talent, that the instrument isn't for them, or that progress is impossible. But a professional musician understands that the first months or even years of practice are just laying the foundation. The real beauty, the real skill, the real musicality emerges only after consistent practice over extended periods. The same principle applies to every meaningful skill or change you want to create in your life. Whether you're developing physical fitness, building a business, learning a craft, or transforming a habit, the most significant progress happens not in dramatic breakthrough moments, but in the accumulated effect of consistent daily action. If you want to win, you have to fall in love with repetition. This is perhaps the most important shift in mindset you can make. Instead of seeing repetition as boring or tedious, you must learn to see it as the very mechanism through which transformation occurs. Every repetition is not just practice, it's literally rewiring your brain, strengthening neural pathways, building muscle memory, creating new capabilities at the deepest level. The phrase "fall in love with repetition" is carefully chosen. Love makes difficult things easier. When you love something, you don't need to force yourself to do it. When you love the process of practice itself, when you find satisfaction in the gradual improvement that comes from consistent effort, the repetition becomes enjoyable rather than burdensome. Not just the big moments, but the boring ones. This distinction is crucial because most people are motivated by peak experiences, breakthrough moments, and dramatic results. They show up when they feel inspired, when conditions are perfect, when the work feels exciting. But the real progress happens in the ordinary moments. The days when motivation is low, when the work feels routine, when nobody is watching or cheering. Professional athletes understand this deeply. They don't just train when they feel like it or when they're preparing for competition. They train consistently, day after day, through injuries, through fatigue, through boredom, through discouragement. They understand that consistency is more important than intensity, that showing up every day is more valuable than showing up with maximum effort occasionally. The days when no one's watching, when it feels like nothing's changing, that's where the real growth happens. This is one of the most counterintuitive aspects of mastery. The changes that matter most are often invisible from day to day. You practice the piano today, and you don't sound significantly better than you sounded yesterday. You exercise today, and you don't look significantly different in the mirror. You work on your business today, and you don't see a significant increase in results. But each day's effort is contributing to a larger pattern of growth that becomes visible only over longer periods. The cumulative effect of consistent daily action creates exponential rather than linear results. Small improvements compound over time, creating dramatic changes that seem sudden to outside observers, but are actually the predictable result of sustained effort. This is why most people quit too soon. They're looking for daily evidence of progress, but real progress often happens below the threshold of daily perception. They're measuring their results on a daily or weekly timescale, but meaningful change often requires months or years to become fully apparent. Understanding this pattern can completely transform your relationship with effort and progress. When you know that the most important changes happen gradually and often invisibly, you stop expecting immediate results. When you stop expecting immediate results, you stop getting discouraged when they don't appear. When you stop getting discouraged, you can maintain consistency over the extended periods required for real mastery. The power of repetition is not just about skill development, it's about character development, identity formation, and psychological transformation. Every time you choose to practice when you don't feel like it, you are strengthening your capacity for self-discipline. Every time you continue when progress seems slow, you're building patience and persistence. Every time you show up consistently over time, you're proving to yourself that you are someone who follows through on commitment. This internal transformation is often more valuable than the external skill you're developing. The discipline, patience, and persistence you build through committed practice transfer to every other area of your life. You become someone who can be trusted to do what you say you will do. Someone who doesn't quit when things get difficult. Someone who understands that meaningful results require sustained effort over time. The river carving through rock teaches us that gentle, consistent pressure applied over time can overcome obstacles that seem immovable. Your daily practice, your consistent effort, your willingness to repeat the fundamentals even when they seem boring, this is your gentle, consistent pressure. Trust the process, embrace the repetition, and allow time to reveal the profound changes that consistent action creates. The enemy within. Your biggest obstacle isn't failure. It's not rejection or bad luck or even your competitors. It's your own mind. This represents perhaps the most important realization you can have about the nature of achievement and success. While we spend enormous amounts of energy trying to control external circumstances, overcome external obstacles, and compete with external opponents, the real battle is always happening inside our own consciousness. Think about every goal you've abandoned, every project you've started but never finished, every commitment you've made to yourself but failed to keep. In how many of these cases were you stopped by external circumstances versus your own internal resistance? Most people, when they examine their failures honestly, discover that external obstacles were rarely the determining factor. The determining factor was usually their own thoughts, emotions, fears, and mental patterns. Self-doubt, fear, impatience, they're all just tests. Every time you feel like giving up, that's the moment you're being prepared for something greater. This perspective completely reframes the meaning of internal resistance. Instead of seeing doubt and fear as evidence that you should stop, you can learn to see them as signals that you're approaching something important something that will require you to grow beyond your current limitations. Consider the nature of self-doubt. It usually appears precisely when you're about to attempt something meaningful, something that would represent real growth or progress. Self-doubt rarely emerges when you're playing it safe, staying in your comfort zone, or attempting things you already know you can do. It emerges when you're stretching yourself, when you're attempting to become more than you currently are. From this perspective, self-doubt becomes not a reason to stop, but a confirmation that you're moving in the right direction. It's your mind's way of saying, this is unfamiliar territory. This requires capabilities we haven't fully developed yet. This involves risk and uncertainty. All of these observations are accurate, but none of them are reasons to abandon your pursuit. Fear operates similarly. Fear is designed to protect you from danger, but in the modern world, most of the things we fear are not actually dangerous. They're just unfamiliar or challenging. Fear of failure, fear of rejection, fear of judgment, fear of not being good enough. These fears don't protect you from physical harm. They protect you from psychological discomfort. But in doing so, they also protect you from growth, achievement, and the satisfaction that comes from overcoming challenges. Impatience is perhaps the most subtle enemy within. Unlike doubt and fear, which are obviously uncomfortable, impatience can feel almost positive. It can feel like ambition, like drive, like eagerness for but impatience is actually a form of resistance to the present moment, a refusal to accept that meaningful achievement requires time and sustained effort. When you're impatient, you're essentially arguing with reality. You're saying that things should be happening faster than they're happening, that you should be further along than you are, that the natural timescale of growth and development should conform to your preferences, rather than its own inherent rhythm. The mind will always look for excuses to stop. This is not a character flaw or a sign of weakness. This is how the mind is designed to operate. The mind's primary function is to keep you safe, and from the mind's perspective, staying safe means avoiding uncertainty, avoiding discomfort, avoiding situations where failure is possible. But growth requires all of these things that the mind wants to avoid. Growth requires uncertainty because you can't grow while staying in situations you've already mastered. Growth requires discomfort because comfort indicates that you're not being challenged. Growth requires the possibility of failure because attempting things you might fail at is the only way to expand your capabilities. Your job isn't to listen. This doesn't mean ignoring all input from your mind or making reckless decisions. It means learning to distinguish between the voice of wisdom and the voice of resistance. The voice of wisdom gives you useful information about how to proceed more effectively. The voice of resistance simply wants you to stop proceeding altogether. The voice of resistance will offer you seemingly reasonable explanations for why you should quit, postpone, or compromise your goals. It will point out risks, remind you of past failures, suggest that perhaps you're not cut out for this particular challenge. All of these observations might contain elements of truth, but their purpose is not to help you succeed more effectively. Their purpose is to help you avoid the discomfort that comes with sustained effort toward meaningful goals. Your job is to keep going until the mind has no choice but to follow you. This is one of the most powerful concepts in personal development. When you consistently act in accordance with your goals, despite internal resistance, something remarkable happens. The mind begins to adapt. The patterns of thought and emotion that initially created resistance begin to change. This process requires patience and persistence. You can't force your mind to change its patterns immediately, but you can choose your actions independently of your mental and emotional state. You can decide to continue working toward your goals even when doubt, fear, or impatience arise. You can train yourself to act based on your commitments rather than your feelings. Over time, this consistent action in spite of resistance creates new neural pathways, new habits of thought, new emotional patterns. What initially required enormous willpower eventually becomes natural and automatic. The mind, having observed that you will continue regardless of its resistance, stops generating as much resistance. It begins to support your efforts rather than undermine them. This transformation represents true victory over the enemy within. You haven't eliminated doubt, fear, or impatience. These are natural human emotions that will continue to arise when you face new challenges. But you've changed your relationship with these emotions. Instead of being controlled by them, you've learned to acknowledge them while choosing your actions independently. The enemy within is not something to be defeated once and forgotten. It's something to be understood, worked with, and gradually transformed through consistent right action. Every time you continue despite internal resistance, you're winning a small victory that contributes to your long-term development of inner strength and self-mastery. Winning without a finish line. Here's the truth: there's no final destination where you'll suddenly feel like you've made it. Even the greatest warriors, the most successful people, they're still growing, still learning, still refining. This realization can be either deeply disappointing or profoundly liberating, depending on how you choose to interpret it. If you've been motivated by the belief that achieving certain goals will bring you permanent satisfaction and allow you to finally relax, this truth might initially feel discouraging. But if you can shift your perspective, this same truth becomes the foundation for a much more fulfilling and sustainable approach to achievement. The illusion of the finish line is one of the most persistent myths in our culture. We're taught to think in terms of graduation, completion, arrival. We imagine that there's some level of success, some amount of money, some degree of recognition, some state of fitness, some quality of relationship that will represent enough, the point where we can stop striving and start simply enjoying what we've achieved. But anyone who has actually reached the goals they thought would satisfy them permanently discovers something unexpected. The satisfaction is real, but temporary. The sense of accomplishment is genuine, but soon after reaching what they thought was their ultimate objective, they find themselves looking toward new challenges, new goals, new levels of achievement. This pattern repeats regardless of the scale of the achievement. Whether someone gets a promotion they've wanted for years, builds the business they've dreamed of, reaches their ideal physical condition, or achieves recognition in their field, the experience follows a similar trajectory. There's a moment of celebration, a period of satisfaction, and then a natural emergence of new aspirations. Some people interpret this pattern as evidence that they're never satisfied, that they have some character flaw that prevents them from appreciating what they have. But this interpretation misses the deeper truth. The pattern exists not because of personal inadequacy, but because of the nature of growth itself. Growth is not a process that reaches a natural stopping point. It's a process that continues as long as life continues. Winning isn't about reaching some imaginary peak. It's about the daily choice to show up, to focus, to ignore what doesn't matter. This redefinition of winning transforms everything about how you approach your goals and your life. Instead of winning being a future event that you're working toward, winning becomes a present moment choice that you make repeatedly. When you show up today despite not feeling motivated, when you focus on your most important work instead of getting distracted by less important activities, you win. When you choose to invest your attention in what serves your growth rather than what merely entertains you. These daily choices are not preparation for winning, they are winning itself. This perspective makes winning sustainable because it's not dependent on external results that you can't completely control. You can control whether you show up, You can control where you focus your attention. You can control what you choose to prioritize. These choices are available to you every day, regardless of your current circumstances, your past failures, or your future uncertainty. The traditional approach to achievement creates a psychological pattern where you're always postponing satisfaction until you reach the next milestone. You tell yourself that you'll be happy when you get the promotion, when you finish the project, when you reach your target income, when you find the right relation. But since there's always another milestone beyond the current one, this approach creates a perpetual state of working toward happiness rather than finding satisfaction in the work itself. The alternative approach finds satisfaction in the process rather than only in the result. This doesn't mean becoming complacent or lowering your standards. It means learning to appreciate the growth that happens through sustained effort, the skills that develop through consistent practice, the character that builds through overcoming daily challenges. When you learn to find satisfaction in the process, several important things happen. First, you become much more sustainable in your efforts because you're not dependent on external validation or specific outcomes to maintain your motivation. Second, you become more resilient when facing setbacks because your sense of progress isn't entirely tied to external results. Third, you become more present and engaged with your current activities because you're not constantly focused on some future state. So ask yourself, can I focus on myself long enough to let everything else fall into place? This question points to one of the most challenging aspects of personal development. In a world full of distractions, comparisons, and immediate demands on your attention, maintaining focus on your own growth and your own path requires constant choice and constant redirection. The phrase long enough is significant because meaningful change requires sustained attention over extended periods. It's not enough to focus on yourself for a day, a week, or even a month. The kind of development that creates lasting change requires focusing on yourself long enough for new patterns to become established, for new skills to become natural, for new ways of thinking to become automatic. Let everything else fall into place doesn't mean becoming passive or expecting success to happen without effort. It means trusting that when you consistently focus on developing yourself, your skills, your character, your understanding, your capabilities, the external results you want will naturally follow. This trust is based on the principle that you can't control outcomes directly, but you can control the inputs that create outcomes. When you focus consistently on becoming more skilled, more disciplined, more knowledgeable, more valuable, opportunities begin to appear. When you focus on developing your character, better relationships begin to form. When you focus on providing value to others, financial success becomes more likely. The external changes don't happen immediately or automatically, but they happen more reliably than when you try to control them directly. This approach requires patience because the timeline for internal development is often longer than we initially expect. It requires faith because you have to continue investing in yourself before you see evidence that the investment is paying off. It requires consistencies because sporadic effort doesn't create the cumulative effects that meaningful change requires. But when you truly commit to this approach, something remarkable happens. You stop being dependent on external circumstances for your sense of progress and satisfaction. You develop confidence that comes from knowing you can rely on yourself to continue growing regardless of what happens around you. You become someone who creates value rather than someone who waits for opportunities, someone who builds strength rather than someone who seeks comfort. Winning without a finish line means embracing the infinite nature of growth and finding joy in the process of becoming rather than only in the achievement of specific goals. It means understanding that the real victory is not reaching some final destination, but becoming the kind of person who can consistently choose growth, focus, and meaningful action, regardless of circumstances. The kind of quiet confidence that comes from knowing you're in control, not of the world, but of your own mind. The outside noise will always be there, but now you know how to rise above it.